Sportswatch podcast. The second week, we're going to do the online thing. Last week, we got some great feedback. It was a lot of fun, so we're going to try it one more time. We're waiting for the stat man, but I got Coach Medicis. Coach, welcome.
Got a microphone, got a camera today.
I know, we can see it today. I like it.
Yeah.
Pags has got hockey, so Pags won't be on with us today, but I'm sure we'll get the stat man on shortly. I just heard a beep, so there he is. Statman, you're right on time.
There he is.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I just got on. I don't know. It said that my password didn't work, so I had to change it back to the one that I was always using the whole time anyway. So
that's okay. It's all right. It's all good. We got a fun show for you today. We got Scott Pitoniak on. What better time to talk Syracuse football with him? And you know I got to get into this Michigan-Ohio State thing because C-Bus goes to me, man. I haven't heard from him. I'm worried about him.
At all.
Unless he just needed the 24 hours to kind of just sleep on it, to digest. But what a great day in college football yesterday. A lot of those big rivalry games were closer than I thought. I thought Georgia was going to hammer Georgia Tech. They struggled for a little bit.
Yeah, much closer than we thought.
Hugh Freeze, what a way for Auburn to lose that football game.
That was crazy. Like, in that situation, there's just so many little things that you could have done, taking advantage of the college rule. Just tackle the guy in the end zone and move up 15 yards.
I know. I mean, that field, the kick 10 years ago, they were showing that during game day and stuff.
Yeah.
But crazy. I don't know what you do with the top four teams now next week and who gets in. If the committee's got to be thinking that if Florida State didn't look great last night. Obviously without Jordan Travis, they struggled. But if they win the ACC championship and they're undefeated, they're in.
They're in.
They would be in. Georgia wins, they're obviously in. Michigan wins, they're obviously in. And then is it the Oregon, Washington winner? Is it the Texas, Oklahoma State winner? Who's going to get left out?
Yeah, I think the worst thing in the world for the committee would be Florida State winning next week. Because that puts them in a spot where they might have to, knock off a undefeated ACC champion in order to bring in an Oregon or a Washington who, by the eye test, and I think you'd ask most people, are better than Florida State right now. But again, undefeated, one-loss team. We're going to get into that discussion, and that's the beauty of the playoffs.
So I got to put a comment here. Rich Molina, I used to work with him down in Columbus, says one play decided that Ohio State-Michigan game. I don't know.
One play decided the ending, but that's no different than the Ohio State-Michigan game in the past. So go back to a million plays.
That's 4-1.
Let's talk about this for a minute because I want to. We could get into the Ryan Day thing in a little bit, and I'm going to flip the roles because the Ohio State fans years ago, and I'm going to jump on this too because I was one of the Michigan guys that said I thought Jim Harbaugh probably should have been fired 3 years ago.
Yep.
And this is exactly the Lloyd Carr thing. This is exactly the John Cooper thing with Ryan Day. I get Ryan Day's got the record. You think he's 55-4 or something ridiculous, 0-3 against Michigan now. But here's what I'll honestly say about Michigan and without Jim Harbaugh, what this showed me. Number one, I said this last week, Michigan's players, they went out and got good players. I think they've matched the talent of Ohio State. Number two is I think Jim Harbaugh went out and got two stud coaches on the coordinators. I think Sherrone Moore and Jesse Minter, great coaches. They don't make mistakes. They, and if you go back and you look at this over the last 20 years, I said this in my pregame shows. I said the team that runs the football outrushes the other team, wins the game. Michigan ran for 156 yards, Ohio State 106. They didn't turn it over. So I think there's a lot of things, but I'm really impressed with the job that the coaching staff's done. No Jim Harbaugh for 5 games. Now they get him to come back. And I said it in August, and I'll say it again, Georgia and Michigan are the two best teams in college football.
Well, and again, this is a big if Jim Harbaugh decides to go to the NFL, which, I think you think he's going to leave. But as a Michigan fan, I don't think it hurts as much as it might have if you said that before the year, not knowing if an assistant coach can step in, if they bring somebody in, and they've proven that they can play without the leadership of Harbaugh and have other people step up. And as a Michigan fan, that's gotta feel good knowing that the program's in great stability right now.
Nick, the other thing that, I think I also said that you had to have creative play calling. I think that, the call that Sharon Moore had with Donovan Edwards on the halfback toss pass was a big play. But even like the 4th and 1 calls, going for it, trusting that offensive line. Now they got to keep low because Zach Zinner's an All-American, who I just read this morning tore his fibula and tibula. So he's out for the rest of the season. That's a huge blow to that offensive line. But again, if you watched Michigan the prior 2 weeks, in the game against Penn State specifically, they couldn't handle the edge rushers for Penn State. And I really think that's why they went to running the ball 35 times.
Yeah,
and they struggled against Maryland. But when you watched the game yesterday, the different formations that Michigan ran to help those offensive tackles against those good edge, that was a good Ohio State defense. I just think the game plan, everything what Michigan did, I mean, they can say it's a chip on their shoulders. They were the better team for 3 years in a row.
Yeah, I agree. They were the better team. They were the more physical team. And honestly, I thought they were the more prepared team. I thought Michigan looked prepared for Ohio State. I mean, Marvin Harrison was the best player. Marvin Harrison Jr. was the best player on the field at all times. That being said, I thought Michigan, for the most part, did a pretty good job against them.
And he had 5 catches.
Yeah, so, I mean, you tip your hat to Michigan. And like you said, the changes that Harbaugh had to make, changing who was the old defensive coordinator that just blitzed all the time and left his
Don Brown.
Don Brown, yeah. I mean, just the changes in scheme and the fact that he, it's tough for a head coach to admit they've screwed up or they've done something wrong and, to give up some power and give it to other people. But what he's done in the last couple of years has changed Michigan football.
I was listening on the way in. I was listening to ESPN radio, and they had Cardale Jones, the former Ohio State quarterback. And, he had a really interesting point. He said, he's one of the guys, Maurice Clarett, if you get on Twitter, he wants Ryan Day fired. And a lot of former players do because of this rivalry. But I thought he had a really interesting point. He said the scheme has to change.
Yeah.
He says, obviously, they get all the skill players and their wide receiver but again, I said this year, I didn't think they had the quarterback that they've had in the past. The JT Barretts, the Cardale Jones. CJ Stroud last year. I just didn't think McCord was ready for that. McCord had a good year. He had a great year for his first time in there. But I think the scheme's got to change. And I'm telling you this, and I know it's not going to happen. They're not going to fire Ryan Day. They shouldn't fire Ryan Day. But one thing I would say is this. If they were to move on from him, I keep saying the name Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel would come in there with the physicality, the run game. I think his style would be very similar to Jim Harbaugh's style. And I think that's what Ohio State is going to need, especially now with USC coming in, UCLA coming in, Oregon coming in. It's all going to change. So I think the scheme's got to change for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, if you look at, Ryan Day in big games, he has athletes, he's got receivers, he's got skill positions, but, the physicality. And I think, Lou Holtz called him out on it earlier in the year, and they struggled to beat Notre Dame. And, we had the whole episode where he's yelling at Lou Holtz about, physicality and whatnot. But, it was true. The recipe to beat Ohio State is to punch them in the mouth and run it right down their throat and be the more physical team. And until they, look at Michigan. A couple of years ago, they were spread it out, wide receivers all over the place. We want to be the flashy team like Ohio State, and you can't beat them in their own game. So he had to change and kind of go back to his roots a little bit and go back to a little more power football. But Ohio State's got to at least look at being more physical and look at, the success of teams lately. Georgia, not really your typical, spread them out, throw the ball all over the place. They want to pound the ball and run it down your throat. So I think the way that college football is, again, changing a little bit, and it's going to change again in 2 years or 3 years, and there's going to be something new, but Ohio State's got to do something different because clearly 3 years in a row it's not working.
Well, I'll ask you guys a question. Does Ohio State move on from Ryan Day?
I don't think they do. If I was an Ohio State fan, I'd be calling for his head right now. Absolutely. I mean, just not even the Michigan game. It's the fact that he hasn't won the big game. And, I've been one of the more outspoken people on that college football rewind. I've been saying it for a couple of years, and I know Seaboss hasn't been happy with me, and they got the one win over Clemson. But, I mean, he hasn't won a big game. He hasn't proven that in a big game situation he can out-scheme you, out-coach you, prepare his team, maybe have a trick up his sleeve. I just haven't seen it from him. And you can't say it's for lack of talent because you'd argue that Ohio State every year is the most talented team in the country. But
well,
at some point –
yeah, I would agree, Nick. I would also say this. I think when you're paying a guy $7-8 million, you're paying him to win those games. You're paying him to win a Big Ten championship. You're paying him to win, get into the playoff and win it. And now that Ohio State has, I think they said he's 1-5, against top 5 teams, and he's 1-5 or 1-6 in the playoffs. So I don't think they move on from him. But if the roles were reversed and Jim Harbaugh was 0-3, the Ohio State fans would be saying the same thing about Michigan, saying, well, they better get rid of Jim Harbaugh because Jim Harbaugh can't win the big game. Right? I mean, if the roles were reversed, they'd be saying the exact same thing. And right now, Ohio State fans don't want to hear it, but the Big Ten runs through Ann Arbor.
But 3 years ago, we had that same conversation with Jim Harbaugh, and we said, what's his record against everybody outside of Ohio State? I think Michigan State was in the discussion at the time. I think he was like, oh, man. This was when you were saying Michigan's got to think about moving on from Harbaugh because he can't beat Ohio State. At the time, he was struggling against Michigan State, struggling against Penn State. He was struggling to win those games, and against everybody else, he was winning. And that's kind of where Ohio State is. And again, Notre Dame, Penn State, yeah, they're a big game to most teams, but to Ohio State, you're national championship or it's a down year. So until you beat the Georgias, the Clemsons, the Michigans, I mean, you really have to consider, is this the right guy or, do we have to go to a Mike Vrabel? Do we have to reach out to Urban again because his name keeps popping up everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, listen, James Franklin, we said it before, James Franklin can't beat Michigan or Ohio State. So Penn State's going to go 10-2 every year, or 9-3. Normally Penn State will lose a game early in the year to somebody they shouldn't. I mean, that was a huge game. I mean, at the time you could say that the Notre Dame win and Penn State were the 2 biggest wins on anybody's resume. But again, when you're at Ohio State and you're at Michigan, you're brought back to win the game. And right now, Ryan Day just hasn't been able to do that. Now, maybe Ryan Day gives up the play calling duties. I hear all this hype, Brian Hartline. Well, then let Brian Hartline call the plays.
Yeah, I mean, again, he's paid to win that game. And you got to remember that, the Big Ten right now is not the same that the Big Ten will be next year. So the conference is just getting harder every year. So if you're not winning right now you bring in USC, you bring in Oregon. I mean, the schedule is going to be tougher next year. Who's to say they lose one of those and now they're not even in a conference championship game because they lose the divisions next year and it's just the 2 best teams. So I think Ohio State really's got to think about things in the direction they want to go. And, if Ryan Day is going to be there next year, he's got to beat Michigan. He has to, or he's done. Has to.
I would agree.
Can't lose 4 years in a row.
We got Scott waiting to jump on, so we're going to talk some Syracuse football. It's good to catch up with Scott. We haven't talked to Scott in a little while, so nobody knows Syracuse sports better than him. So let's see if we can grab Scott here. There he is. Scott, how are you, my friend?
Yeah. I'm doing great, guys. How are you guys doing?
Doing fantastic. We're talking, recapping a little bit about that Michigan-Ohio State game, and what do the Buckeyes do with Ryan Day now? 0-3 against Michigan the last 3 years. What a game, though.
Yeah, it's sad, but those are the types of records that get you fired in spite of everything that he's done there. You've got to beat your rival. I mean, it's that big. And but yeah, that was an incredible game. And this whole soap opera thing with Michigan, like in their record with, with Harbaugh there and so forth and all that that's going on. I mean, it's just adds to the intrigue of everything right now.
Well, Scott, nobody knows Syracuse sports like you do, so we're excited to talk about Dino Babers firing and who's the next guy coming in. And first, I'll just ask you this: do you think it was the right time for Dino for the university to part ways with him?
Yeah, I do. You never want to do anything during the season, but given the way things have changed with the business of college athletics now, you've really got to make these changes and go and get your next coach now. You can't really wait because you've got some important dates coming up in terms of transfer portals and all this other stuff that is complicated and kind of turned college sports into free agency. But I think, Rock, I think he had 8 years. That's an eternity in today's world of sports now, where nobody gets that kind of time anymore. He was had a record, that was hovering around, under 40% winning percentage and stuff, and had the worst record in the ACC over that time. So I think it was time. It was probably maybe overdue time, to be honest. Dino brought, I thought he brought a fresh approach there. We were all excited. And then, early on, they have the big upset of Clemson. Number 2, Clemson comes in. They upset them, and you start to think like, whoa, might have something here. He had the 10-win season, and that just, fueled the optimism even more. But then, we saw that it was kind of a smokescreen. He's had, if you want to give him credit for this season, he had 3 winning seasons in 8 years. And that's just not going to cut it. Again, the whole landscape of college sports has changed. Let's call it what it is. It's a big business. And, if you want to play with the big boys, then you better get the right coach in there, and you better also make some other changes as well. So, yes, long-winded answer. I think he had more than enough time. It was of the modern era of Syracuse University coaches, only Ben Schwartzwalter, Dick McPherson, and Paul Pasqualoni had longer tenures and opportunities to show their wares and prove that they deserved it. So I think he got a fair shot. We can talk about, name, image, likeness, and the other things. I mean, maybe it wasn't so fair. We're not comparing apples to oranges here, but I think he got a long enough shot to prove himself, and, it didn't work out.
Scott, I thought the AD had a couple interesting comments this week, and one of them he said he discussed with Coach Babers in the preseason was the benchmark was 7-5. So one of the things that Coach Medicis and I always talk about is, what are the expectations at Syracuse that, if you go 6-6, you go 7-5, you get to a bowl game, is that good enough for Syracuse? And I always use Dave Clawson because I think what Dave's done outside of this year, they struggled. But what Dave's done at Wake Forest, he had the 1 year where I think they were 10-2, but he's been to a bowl game every year. Is that the expectations of Syracuse for somebody coming in?
We've talked about Clawson before, and I used Wake Forest as kind of the standard. John Wildhack, the athletic director at Syracuse, talks a lot about our peer institutions. Clemson is not your peer institution. Florida State is not your peer institution. You can't be expected to compete year after year after year, like double-digit wins, expectations like you have at those schools. But there's no reason why you have to settle for mediocrity and be, a bottom feeder here. I think Clawson has done a tremendous job. I think here's the realistic approach I try to take to it, and bring to it, and that is, you can occasionally have that 10-win season and maybe knock off the Clemson and Florida State in the same season and be in contention or whatever. But the other seasons, to win 8 is not bad, and to go to a middling bowl, or better than a crummy bowl, which many of them are. Let's be honest. There's 82 teams qualify for bowls now, so it's like a participation trophy. Okay, let's be honest here. So I think that's a good barometer is what Clawson has done at Wake Forest. And I'm going to be honest with you, Syracuse has better facilities and certainly has a greater tradition and so forth than Wake Forest has. And yet, look what Clawson has been able to do, against the big boys and stuff. So I think that's a good bar. Like, be good. And yeah, this is an aberration this year for Clawson, and that he loses his star quarterback, and you got to work things in, and he loses the star receiver early in the season. So I think that's a good standard. And I keep hearing from people like, oh, they'll never be able to compete. I'm not. Syracuse is a tough job. Let's be honest. I mean, as far as football is concerned, in the new world of collegiate sports and stuff. And we've talked about recruiting in New York State, this and that. Although I think one of the failings of that I would have, one of the criticisms I would have of Dino was that he didn't do a good enough job recruiting kids in New York State. And I put the blame on him because that is all about relationship building with high school coaches. And I've heard this is not just pontificating. I've heard from top level high school football coaches here in the Rochester area and in central New York about this, that, he didn't take the time like Pasqualoni and even Barone did in his brief time at Syracuse, and certainly like Coach Mack did, to build those relationships with high school coaches here. He finally, finally got it right in terms of you also got to recruit New Jersey very heavily. Yep. So football-rich state and stuff like that. So, but yeah, Clawson is, I think that's a good model, and find out what his blueprint was and how he's done it, and try to follow some of it.
Scott, the other thing, Nick was giving me a hard time this morning because I said if Garrett Schrader doesn't go down, there's a really good opportunity. I think Syracuse could have won a couple more games and maybe get to that 7-5. If he doesn't go down, and maybe they beat Boston College, they beat Georgia Tech, which were 2 games they lost, I think, by less than 10 points. Do you think they would have hung on to him, or do you still think Syracuse would have moved on?
I think they would have hung on to him, but I don't know if that would have been good in the long term. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you got a problem and you keep kicking the can down the road and whatever. And I think that, it would have been good for him, good for this season. Whatever, maybe gets a slight extension. I don't know, but would it have been good for the program? And I would say probably not. Because I really think a change is needed. A new approach, a fresh approach is needed here. And it's not going to happen overnight. We're going to see how many kids transfer or whatever. And, we'll see what Syracuse's commitment is to the program in terms of paying a coach and in developing, a name, image, likeness program that's going to enable you to compete with your quote unquote peer institutions. So, Schrader stays healthy. Maybe they have 2 more wins, and then Dino's here, and happy days or whatever, and Wild Hack will say as he said erroneously early this season, like the program's on its ascendancy. No, it's not.
Right. And Scott, the big name that's all over social media is Dan Mullen. And listen, I was very high on Dan Mullen when he was at Florida. I thought he got a raw deal there, and Mississippi State too. And, again, I'll go back to the AD when he said he was looking for a Northeast guy. And I'm a Patriot League guy, so I'm high on Bob Chesney because I know he'll recruit those New York State guys. He might not have the resume and be the flashy name. Are you hearing any more rumblings that it's Dan Mullen's job?
Yeah, I mean, there were rumors yesterday that he's been on campus and he's the guy or whatever. And Wild Hack has said when he put his criteria out there, he wants somebody northeastern roots. And I'm glad to hear that because the thing that Syracuse could live with southern recruits is I think a pipe dream. I think you need kids from Florida and you need kids from down south, and they've had success getting those guys. But I think you need somebody with that imprint. Now, Mullen what he did at, Mississippi State, what he at Florida. Florida's, again, it's like the expectations are through the roof there. And, we talked about Ohio State, you better beat Michigan, even though, that might be your only loss of the year and you're still in contention for a national championship and whatever, So, I don't know. I mean, Chesney's interesting to me because I kind of like that dynamic. What he's done at Holy Cross, I mean, beating BC and being right in, the fray for a national championship for like 2 years, at that level. He's got the Northeastern footprint, which is, I think is a smart way to go. And you need somebody who knows, the landscape here of what it's going to take for a Syracuse, a Boston College, a Pitt, whatever, to win, in a tougher situation in terms of recruiting and that sort of thing. So, he seems to be, but who knows? I mean, it could be somebody out of the blue that, none of us had speculated on. I mean, I'm hearing a lot about Al Golden too. Again, a Northeastern imprint, and he's going to want to coach again, and he's got an impressive background. Are you going to go that route? And and would he leave a defensive coordinator spot at Notre Dame to go to Syracuse? Again, I suppose a lot of it has to do I can be the guy that can win there. I can make my name for myself, and it'd be a pretty good job. They talked about Toledo's coach, Jason Kendall, and Charles Huff from Marshall. Great, but I don't know. I mean, Mullen certainly would be a big splash, and he's got the pedigree, working on ESPN and stuff like there. We see, but I'm intrigued by Chesney. I really am.
Yeah, he'd be the guy that I just think his personality, everything fits, what Syracuse would need. And, coming from an FCS school, I think with the recruiting ties, the other thing that's really interesting is you hear the Syracuse guys, right? You hear the Tony Whites, you hear the Sean Lewis, from Colorado, which that's a disaster in itself. I don't know why they yanked it from Sean Lewis. I thought the offense, I think they were averaging like 30-something points a game with him as the OC, but I had threw out there a couple local names. I know it's not going to happen. The Mike Hart situation would be great seeing Mike Hart come back, but I think Mike Hart's going to be the offensive coordinator at Michigan because I think Jim Harbaugh is going to the NFL. I said it in August. I said regardless of what happened this year, I thought this was it for him. I think this is the best team that Jim's had there. So I thought that Jim would go to the NFL, Sharon Moore would be promoted to the head coach, and Mike Hart would get promoted to the OC. Joe Moorhead, who's a New York State guy, he's a former Fordham coach. He was the Penn State OC. He's at Akron, which has been a disaster. And then I threw out Herb Hannon, Scott, the local guy, from Westmoreland. It's been around college football for a long time. Maybe there would be a chance, Herb would come home. So a lot of local guys, but, some guys that were former Syracuse coaches.
Yeah. And let's remember, like when we talk about Mullen, he was a grad assistant under Pasqualoni. So,
yep.
It gives him another indication he understands what's going on or what it could be when Pasqualoni had it going pretty good there following on Mac. No, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, yeah, Hart, I've heard Hart's name, and a lot of people in Syracuse have thrown that out in particular. And I'm just thinking for him from a coaching standpoint, he's probably, I don't know how seriously they would look at him yet, but he probably needs to make that next step. And like you say, if he becomes the OC at Michigan, that's a pretty good launching pad to a head coaching job, at a big school too. I think so. I think, guys, we have to come back to what is the commitment of the administration of Syracuse University? What do you want to be? And if you really want to be something, you're going to have to pay more for the coaches, and the assistant coaches. I mean, Tony White and stuff. I mean, he leaves Syracuse because he can make a boatload more money. But some might say, well, that was a lateral position move, although you're going to a higher profile program in Nebraska and stuff. But the money, it's laughable, the difference in the money there. I mean, and Al Golden, I don't know what he's making as a coordinator at Notre Dame and the perks and stuff, but it could be more than Dino was making as a head coach at Syracuse. Those are the realities of an SEC school or a Notre Dame or a Big Ten school that Syracuse has to deal with. So, Hart, I don't know. I just don't. Again, I try to be careful. Like when you want local people necessarily, and I'm not certainly not against local people if they're ready or whatever. But to think the prodigal son's coming home to save the program, where is the background of the proof and what you've accomplished so far? Yeah, there'll be an initial wonderful splash if Hart comes back to Syracuse, okay, and this and that. But is he the right guy? And would you be better long term with Chesney, Mullen, Golden, one of those guys who have already proven themselves?
So Scott, outside of Syracuse, the last thing I wanted to ask you, who's your 4 playoff teams right now?
Well, obviously Michigan. My gosh, what they're doing without their head coach there is pretty remarkable. Bama, I wouldn't want to play Bama right now, I guess, but they almost lost. I mean, but that's a rivalry game, and so you got to take that into account. But they seem to they've got their act together. How about Ohio State? And I didn't see the late results, but Florida State and Washington, what happened there?
Florida State ended up winning. They pulled away late, and then Washington hung on over Washington State late field goal.
Yeah, so probably Washington. I would have liked Florida State if the quarterback hadn't gotten hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sad. That's what happens. Sad for him and sad for that program because it seems like they were back in a national championship contender. So I probably move Washington then.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see with the conference championships next week because, you could have the Big 12. If Texas wins, you could argue say they're in. The Pac-12 winner, that Oregon-Washington game's probably in.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to get left out, unfortunately, and it might be right now. And I don't think they should penalize Florida State without the quarterback. But if they go 12-0 and win the ACC, I don't know how you leave an undefeated 12-0 team out.
I agree, but you know how that is. It's interesting. It's just we see this like when it comes time for March Madness, right? And if you have an injury late, and the committee does take that into account. And so I'm not saying it's right, and it's certainly not fair to the program or the team. But the reality is too that you're not the same team that you were when you lose a superstar athlete and stuff, particularly at a position like quarterback, So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But I don't know. Michigan is, to do this under these circumstances it's unprecedented, really, if you think about it. Your coach not being there for how many games? Your head coach?
Yeah, 5 games.
Yeah. But then again, maybe it's your, people could argue too, it's your rallying cry, right? It's us against the world. It's us against NCAA. People that hate Michigan, they're just piling on us, not realizing that what you did was not cool, but that's kind of where we are.
Well, Scott, we'll have to have you on again and talk some Syracuse hoops. That's coming, but it's good to have you back on. We haven't talked to you in a little while, so we'll do it again soon. And happy Thanksgiving to you. And we always appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys, for having me anytime. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, you wake up this morning and you see Texas A&M. Everybody thought Mark Stoops was going to Texas A&M, and I guess the Board of Regents voted it down, which is the reason why. He said he wanted to stay at Kentucky, but I read the Board of Regents voted him down. I don't know if that would have been a step up, for him or not. But when you look at the Syracuse job, and I think Scott touched on a lot of things that we've talked about. Dan Mullen got fired because he fell back on the recruiting. He wasn't bringing in the 5-star guys down at Florida. If you want a guy with Northeast ties that can recruit this area, it's Bob Chesney. Now, Bob's not the flashy name. People are going to say, who? The Holy Cross coach. That's who Syracuse is going to hire. But I think for this type of a job, I think he's a young guy with the recruiting background. I think he would be my pick. And I'm not just because of the Patriot League, but I'm just saying I think he fits what Syracuse needs at this time.
Yeah, I thought he hit the nail on the head. What Syracuse has lacked is putting a wall around the state of New York, getting into New Jersey, getting into Pennsylvania, and then kind of scooping up what's left in Ohio and Florida. That's what worked for Syracuse for years. And, if you look at when the tide kind of turned, it's when Rutgers started getting all those New Jersey kids to stay in Rutgers. Mm-hmm. And then they started plucking those Ohio kids away from Syracuse. And now you look at where Rutgers is in the Big Ten. Rutgers has out-recruited Syracuse. And I think that's kind of been one of the downfalls of Syracuse football.
I was asking Scott who his top 4 was. And, man, I'll tell you, the committee's
forgot Georgia.
The committee's going to have it hard because my wife last night and some of the Buckeye fans.
That must have been fun.
She was good. She didn't say much. I'm not one of those Michigan fans that when Michigan wins that I run around all day and rub it in their face.
Yeah.
If Ohio State would have won, she would have rubbed it in my face the entire day.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm not one of those fans. I respect it.
It was a good game.
But people think that there's still a chance for Ohio State to back in like they did last year.
There's always
this is the only year I would say no, because you have all these one-loss teams playing for a conference championship. The argument, Nick, I think what's going to happen is if the rankings come out, when they come out this week, I would actually flip now and put Michigan 1, Georgia 2, because Georgia was, I think, an 18-point favorite over Georgia Tech.
Uh-huh.
I would flip them. I would put Michigan 1 now. I'd put Georgia at 2. And if you want to put Georgia, say they keep Georgia at 1, Michigan at 2. If Alabama beats them, do you drop Georgia with 1 loss from 1 out of the top 4?
Well, let me ask you a question. Ohio State at 2 loses to number 3 Michigan, and you say automatically they drop out. But if Georgia at 1, or necessarily if they drop to 2 because the committee puts Michigan at 1, loses to number 8, how do you keep them in and justify the fact that you dropped Ohio State for losing to the number 3 team on the road in a game where at the end they could have scored to win the game? I just think that whole mix-up, whether it's the eye test, whether it's the fact that Georgia's the defending national champs, whether it's the SEC versus the Big Ten, I don't know how one fits and the other one doesn't. If we say that Ohio State is out because they lose to Michigan on the road, how do you say that Georgia stays in losing to a team? Realistically, if we're ranking teams right now, Alabama's at best number 8. So how does that justify staying in, losing to number 8 on neutral ground? It's not even like they're losing on the road. We're talking neutral field. So to me, I think at this point, if Ohio State's out with a loss, I think Georgia gets knocked out with a loss.
So let's just picture it this way. Let's say Alabama beats them, which I don't know. It could happen. Alabama's hot right now. Milroe's playing as good as anybody.
Alabama was looking ahead too. Everyone said that game was a no-brainer. Auburn stinks this year. They're going to blow them out. It's a rivalry game.
So if Alabama beats Georgia, right? Let's say that happens. Michigan beats Iowa. Michigan's in. The winner of that Washington-Oregon game is probably in. Then you have, what if Florida State wins and they're 12-0? And then what if Texas, a 1-loss team? If Alabama and Texas both win, Texas beat Alabama head-to-head.
Right.
So who's left out? How do you does the head-to-head come into play and say, well, Alabama won the SEC, but Texas won head-to-head. Texas is in. Oregon's in. Michigan's in. And then Florida State.
Well, again, I think it goes back to the committee and what is the purpose of the committee? Is it to reward the best 4 teams throughout the regular season, or is it to put the current best 4 teams in a playoff to determine who the national champion is? Because if you're rewarding teams for a great regular season and going 12-0, then Florida State's in. But if your job is to put the 4 best teams into a playoff to see who the best team in the country is, then Florida State's got to be on the outside looking in, based on, Jordan Travis getting hurt. So again, I think a lot that depends on which way the committee looks at things, because again, last week, Florida State won. Again, it didn't look good, but they won and they dropped from 4 to 5. So the precedent's already set. They're kind of pushed them out, if Georgia loses and Florida State wins, again, would a 1-loss Georgia team beat this current Florida State team? I think you'd ask most people, and most people would say, yes, Georgia's better than Florida State with the current quarterback situation, even if they do lose to Alabama. But again, if Georgia's sitting at 4 and Alabama just beat them, how do you justify Alabama being below Georgia? How do you justify Texas being below Alabama if Alabama's up there? There's a lot of, what ifs. And I think, we always have this discussion, but then we get to championship week and all of a sudden, Louisville beats Florida State. That knocks them right out of the conversation. What happens if Iowa somehow gets Michigan? If Michigan loses to Iowa, are they still in based on the fact that they've ran the table and beat Ohio State? Or are they knocked out with an upset? I mean, there's a lot of what ifs.
Yeah, I think they'd be out. Not a non-conference championship. Again, this is a year where, again, you got all these Power 5 teams playing for a conference championship. I think it's unfortunate for Florida State because here's the argument I would have. And yes, that loss is huge because I think if Jordan Travis is there, I think they hammered Florida last night. Florida State's still good. Defensively, they're really good. They still can run the football. But here's what I'll say. Early in the year, Florida State beat a top 10 LSU team. They beat a top 10 Clemson team, which I know it's not the same Clemson, but Clemson's back in the top 25. LSU, still LSU. Those were 2 really good wins. Washington right now probably has the best resume. You could argue and say that Washington probably could have been number 2, number 3 this past week with the wins. If they were to lose to Oregon, people could say, okay, a 1-loss Washington with the wins that they have on their resume could get in over an undefeated Florida State team. I think it's really hard, and I don't think it's going to happen. If Florida State beats Louisville, I don't think the committee leaves them out. A 12-0 Power 5 team, conference championship, I don't think they leave them out at all. But I think that's the debate we're going to have because we've seen crazier things happen. But I'm looking at right now the top 8 coming into this past weekend. Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, Washington, Florida State, Oregon, Texas, Bama, Missouri, and Louisville. So I would probably say is my top 4 coming into this coming week would probably be I would put Michigan at 1, Georgia at 2. I would put Washington at 3. I'd put Florida State at 4, and then I'd have Oregon 5, Texas, and then Alabama, just because Texas beat Alabama head-to-head. And then I'd probably put Ohio State at number 8, coming in. I mean, if they put the Buckeyes at 5, you got all those conference championship games. They're going to fall back out anyways. They're going to get leapfrogged. So I would put them down at 8. But I think the committee's got a really tough job this coming week. And I think it's too bad for Florida State. I do, because I think Florida State had a really good chance, to win the whole thing this year.
Yeah, I agree. And, this season alone has really got me excited for that 12-team playoff next year because I'm sitting here thinking about possible matchups that could have happened. Had things, just an 8-9 game, you could have like a Bama versus Ohio State first-round matchup. Just games like that. Winner goes and plays Georgia. I mean, stuff like that, that's exciting. But yeah, I don't feel for the committee because your 1 through 8 is definitely different than my 1 through 8 because I have Ohio State, possibly at 5 right now. And seeing how things kind of weigh itself out. I mean, if you say Oregon's at 4 and Washington's at 3, and I say Ohio State's at 5, well, Oregon and Washington, one of them's going to lose, so that pushes Ohio State up. And would you say Ohio State's better than Texas, better than Alabama? Let's see how the results go this weekend. But
I would normally say that I think Ohio State could get in if in a situation like that, Nick. And a lot of people think that Ohio State may only drop down to 5. I mean, listen, it was against the number 3 team in the country at their place.
Yep.
1-score game. But I think this year, just because of the one-loss teams playing for a conference championship, I think that'll be the reason that'll keep the Buckeyes from backdooring themselves in. If this was a year where, hey, listen, if Georgia loses, if Michigan loses, if Florida State loses, you still can see some chaos if that happens.
Well, and that's my whole thing. I think most would say Michigan's going to win. I think Georgia's going to win, and that would knock Alabama out. But, what happens if Washington, like you said, jumps up to 3 and loses a really close game to Oregon and Florida State loses? And, now you're looking at, Washington played in a conference title game and lost to Oregon, a team they had already beaten, versus an Ohio State who, again, would have played for a conference championship had there not been divisions, but lost on the road at Michigan, fighting for that last spot. And again, a lot of it's all what ifs, because if Florida State wins, they should be in. But, crazy things happen, especially at conference championship time. So we're going to speculate all sorts of things, but it's going to play itself out and it's going to kind of ease up. But there's always going to be one team, regardless of whether there's 68 teams in a tournament, number 69 and 70 always have an argument that they should be in. This is no different. The 4 teams are getting in, 5, 6, and 7 think they should be in. When we go to 12, 13, 14 are going to argue that they should be in. So we're always going to have this conversation. And that's the beauty of having playoffs and putting in the hands of the committee.
So I want to ask you guys this question and go back to the Syracuse thing, and then I want to get into some NFL with you guys for a little bit. Who does Syracuse hire? You think it's Dan Mullen?
I think right now it's between Mullen and Chesney. I think those are the 2 names. But again, they want a name before the portal opens up on the 4th. But also regular season just ended, and normally this is the time the ADs kind of sit down and figure out, is this the right person for the job? What happens if UCLA says, you know what, Chip Kelly's not the guy. Chip Kelly has Northeast roots. He won at New Hampshire. Is he someone that sneaks into the picture late? There's a lot of names that could come out of nowhere. I know Statman's not going to hear that like this, but, a local guy's Matt Patricia. He was an NFL coach. I don't like that hire.
A very bad one.
But I wouldn't be opposed if, depending on how quick they want to move through this, if they reach out to more people. Personally, I'd like to say, hey, listen, Dan Mullen's been on campus twice. He's met with the AD twice. He was at the game yesterday. I'd love to see an announcement, on Monday saying, hey, Dan Mullen's going to be the coach. That puts some stability in the program. He can start talking to guys and hopefully avoid them hitting the transfer portal. But also it puts a coach in place. So when the portal opens up, maybe some people want to come to Syracuse. Maybe he gets some people.
So here,
because you take away Schrader. I mean, Schrader's not a Syracuse recruit. You take him away and he doesn't come to Syracuse. Dino Babers is probably fired 3 years ago because he can't recruit a quarterback.
No. Here's what I'll say, and I think this might be a curveball. UCLA got hammered last night to Cal. And I think that UCLA now, I think, is going to be 7-5. If they would have won last night, I think they end 8-4. They go to a bowl game, maybe 9-4. I think Chip Kelly gets fired. And I think that opens up the UCLA job. Texas A&M doesn't have a coach. I'm reading a couple different things on the A&M job. I think Dan Mullen gets a bigger job than Syracuse. I think there's going to be a couple more big jobs and dominoes to fall. If Dan Mullen wants the money, he's going to get more money at a school like UCLA than Syracuse, which then I think would open a door. I wouldn't put it past Chip Kelly with Northeast ties. But I did read this morning coming in that the AD for Syracuse was on his way to Chicago to discuss his coaching job. And I think you're going to get a decision on this as early as tomorrow, early next week. But don't be surprised if Dan Mullen's rooming for a big job versus a Syracuse job.
But Rock, and that's the point. Like, with people firing coaches right now, if you're Syracuse and Dan Mullen is your guy,
Gotta get
move on this right now and you don't wait, because if a UCLA comes calling, that's a much better job. That's a much better situation than a Syracuse. You jump at this situation right now. If he's your guy and you met with him and you're confident, he's a big name guy. You make the job, you figure out what the finances are and you take care of it as soon as possible and show, the community and the boosters that this is your guy. We back him and we want to move forward right away.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, Nick. All right, guys, little NFL here. Nick, you're Buffalo Bills, man.
Yeah.
6-5. Big game today against Philly. I was trying to look to see what the line was for that game. Right now it's Philly's only -3, but the Bills have a tough stretch here. What, Philly, then Kansas City?
Yeah, Philly by Kansas City, then Dallas.
So they could be under 500. What's going on in Buffalo? Is it time for a change there?
Yeah, I think it's a similar situation right now where McDermott's kind of fighting for his job right now. Are the Bills good enough to win a couple of games? Absolutely. But you just don't know what Bills team is going to show up, because the Bills team that played Miami early on and absolutely dominated the Dolphins is not the Bills team that's playing right now. The OC firing was definitely needed. I mean, I thought that brought some life to the offense. When Brian Dable was the OC, you saw a lot of motion. He moved guys around. And, motion's the new thing in the NFL. It's, you're reading defenses, you're making reads early on and setting up plays. And when they went to Dorsey, when Dable left and Dorsey came in, the Bills' offense went so vanilla and so predictable. And I think Dan Orlovsky made a great, video on it. I mean, you could determine what play was being called just based on the formation. And just last week with Brady, the motion and trying to get the ball into the running back's hands, and it just opened things up a little bit. So again, that was with 6 days of having him there. Now we're talking, a week and a half. I want to see how the offense goes, but I mean, let's also understand that Philly's good, but Philly hasn't been, blowing people out and hasn't looked amazing. I mean, they're 9-1, but it's not, the dominant 9-1 right now. I mean, you got to remember their one loss is to the Jets. So it's not unthinkable that Buffalo could go to Philly and come out with a win, rest up on a bye week and then say, hey, listen, if we split at Kansas City or at home against Dallas, we win 2 of 3, then the schedule really opens up. And now we're just trying to give ourselves a chance to sneak in as a wild card, because at that point they're going to get a little more healthy as the season goes on. And, again, in the playoffs, you just play the one game and you move on. And I still see the possibility of Buffalo getting hot at the right time. And they're able to knock off anybody in the NFL.
Shit, man, we were watching the Thanksgiving Day game, and Mike was pretty upset about your lie downs. But the positive news for the Lions, they're in that NFC North. They still got a 2-game lead over the Vikings. I still think Detroit's going to win that division. I still think Detroit's got a Super Bowl caliber team, but they got to try to find ways to win those games they need to win. What were your thoughts on the lie downs?
I don't know. It was, I think, overall for the season, I'm still optimistic. That last game didn't really change my outlook on the season as a whole. But I mean, I really, really was baffled by that 4th and 1 fake punt that they did. I mean, you're that far in your own territory. I understand, trying to make something happen, but I mean, that's just I don't see that call. And then they turned that into 7 points. So, I mean, I think that was one of the main things. And then when you have Jordan Love just go off for a career day and have all the time in the world to throw. I mean, that was a recipe for disaster. But I mean, I don't see them. If this was the old Lions, I mean, I could see them folding up the tent stakes and just saying, forget about the rest of the season. But I like what Campbell's been since he's got there. He has the locker room still, so I'm not worried.
Go ahead, Nick. You're good.
I'm just saying, the Lions are in great shape right now. They're looking for a top playoff seed in the NFC. I mean, the biggest thing for them is defensively. I mean, you've given up points now to the Bears and Packers, two teams that aren't playoff teams, in back-to-back weeks. The offense has looked good, but the last 2 weeks have kind of struggled, and then they made comebacks late. I still really like the Lions. I'm really high on the Lions. I think, the NFL is such a long season that you go in these little, like, I want to say waves and hills, but, you have good weeks and you have bad weeks. But at the end of the day, I like Goff. You got two-headed monster at running back. You got a stud receiver. If the defense, can put it together towards the end, I mean, the Lions are good enough to play in the Super Bowl this year. I mean, they're good enough to beat the Eagles. They're good enough to beat San Francisco, depending on what San Francisco shows up. I mean, a couple weeks ago, the 49ers were struggling, and all of a sudden last week they put it on, and now they're the Super Bowl favorites again. So I wouldn't get too down on the Lions. I mean, I'd say they're still one of the better teams, especially in the NFC.
So I was just looking because I was trying to look to see where Jim Harbaugh is going to coach next year. There could be potentially 8 or 9. And I'm just going to say these out loud with you guys. I think Robert Saleh gets fired in New York.
Yep.
I think Belichick is going to be out in New England. I keep hearing he's going to Washington. So let's say that's 2. I don't think any coach in the AFC North, Baltimore, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati is getting fired. I think that, I don't know. The AFC South, Jacksonville, Houston, the Colts are 5-5. I don't think they're going anywhere.
He just hired a new coach. He's not going anywhere.
I mean, is Mike Vrabel, they're at 3-7, are the Titans? Will he go to New England? I think Kraft said that he could potentially make the move and bring Mike Vrabel back to New England.
Might be at Ohio State, too. You never know. Isn't that your guy? Isn't that your call?
Yep. The Raiders and the Chargers, they're both going to get fired.
Yep.
So that's 4. The Commanders, that's 5. The Bears job, I'm going to say, would be 6. Carolina 7, and then the Cardinals 8.
Carolina just hired Frank Wright, and he's got Bryce Young, the number 1 pick. They're not gonna.
You don't think they let him go another year?
They just traded their whole future to trade up to number 1. There's no way.
So let's say 7, at least 6.
Yeah, I'd say, and then you got to
maybe
talk,
the Bills.
I was going to say you got to talk. Possible Bills could make a move. There's always one that comes out of left field that you're kind of surprised about. So
Giants, I forgot to throw the Giants in there. He could get
Giants,
fired.
Dable's on the hot seat. I mean, there's a lot of jobs that could go either way. People could go one more year with them, but there's definitely going to be openings.
I just read now breaking news. Indiana fires Tom Allen at Indiana.
There you go.
So there's another job open. But I was kind of contradicting myself here because I was saying that if I'm a college guy like Jim Harbaugh, I would go to the NFL so you don't have to deal with the portal, the NIL. But then it's like, you go to the NFL and I'm just looking at, you say Brian Dable. You look at some of these guys that were the hot names.
Yeah.
Right? Would we ever think that your guy in Buffalo, we'd be talking about him getting fired?
Well, wasn't he coach of the year last year?
I know. That's what I mean. So you could have one down year, a couple down years in the NFL, and you're gone.
Yeah.
College, I mean, the same thing. If you have a couple, 2 or 3 down years in college with these guys making, I don't know what Harbaugh makes. I think it's like $6 to $8 million a year. He's going to make more in college than he would in the NFL. Would you want to deal with the headaches?
Well, that's the thing. You got all these guys that are kind of at like mid-tier jobs, like Clausen, for instance.
$3-4 million a year.
Yeah, $3-4 million a year. He could go 8-4 and be looked at as a great coach, or he can leave and go to Michigan State have to deal with that nonsense in the Big Ten. At best, have a 7-5 record and get fired because that's not good enough because you're losing to Michigan, you're losing to Ohio State, now you're losing to Oregon, you're losing to USC. I mean, Penn State. I mean, why would you leave? Why would you leave? Try to build it up. Every once in a while, you get a magical run. You go 10-2, 11-1. You get a New Year's Day bowl, then you go back to 8-4, and you make yourself. You enjoy the bad boy mowers?
Yeah,
Gasparilla Bowl.
The Gasparilla Bowl.
Yeah.
Cody said that he said Medici smiled when he said Oregon. He's a secret fan. I will say this, and I don't want to make his ego any bigger than it is, Nick.
Yeah.
But if there's one team right now, being a Michigan fan, that I don't want to play, it's Oregon. I'll play Washington.
With Washington.
I do not want to play Oregon right now. I think they're the hottest team. I think they beat up Washington next week.
But Rock, Bo Nix has not Bo Nixed yet, and we know it's coming.
True. Very true.
He's
due for that game.
He's due for that one game.
Does Daniels win the Heisman?
I think he. Did you see the band?
Yeah,
that was cool. That was cool.
I think he's your Heisman winner.
I think he's your favorite right now.
I mean, some people. You could argue it's down to him and Bo Nix. I think the best player in the country is Marvin Harrison, but
yes,
it'll always be one of the two quarterbacks. And
so you started going, and you said, you're trying to research where Harbaugh is going out of those teams. Who's the fit?
I think you go where the quarterback is. I think you go to the Chargers. I think that's where the quarterback is, but I keep hearing the Raiders. I keep hearing the Bears are going to come calling to bring him back to Chicago. Can you imagine Justin Fields with Jim Harbaugh?
Well, if you go back,
take the field for him.
Yeah.
If you go back to when he was at San Francisco, you got to look for somewhere that has a great offensive line, that has tight ends that want to get involved. It only needs one or two receivers. I mean, quarterback-wise, he won with Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick, who, again, were solid NFL quarterbacks, but they're not, top 10 quarterbacks. I mean, Justin Herbert is a great quarterback, but it's almost like you need more of, the pieces around than a quarterback. He won with he's like doing what everyone said you can't do, winning without a top-end quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Which one do you think makes the best fit for him?
I don't know. I mean, you look at like a Tennessee and you say, all right, you got Derrick Henry, an offensive line, DeAndre Hopkins, some young receivers. They're kind of lacking a quarterback. Will Levis is okay, but you put him in that kind of scheme, that smash mouth that Mike Vrabel ran with a decent defense, and maybe he's an answer in, again, not the strongest division. I mean, Jacksonville, Houston, the two top teams. Indianapolis is kind of rebuilding. I don't know. I don't know where he goes. I think he's going to have his choice, and that's the good thing, is he gets to kind of choose where he wants to go.
So before we pick some of these NFL games, I just had a crazy thought here as I'm looking at my notes on the screen, which, again, this one of the reasons why I like the podcast, guys. I got all my notes on the screen, so it makes my job a little bit easier here. But is there a chance – I know Michigan's going to get Harbaugh back. Any chance they sit down with him and Jim says, I'm going to the NFL. Sharon Moore's had this team the last 3 weeks. Let him finish this thing out because he's going to the end. Any chance? I was just thinking of this morning on my way in.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was reading that Ward Manuel, the AD, said they're excited to get Jim Harbaugh back. The players are excited to get him back. But I'm sure these last 3 weeks, Jim has spoken to NFL teams. If he's made his mind up, I could see him saying, you know what? I'm going to the NFL. Sharon Moore's done a fantastic job. This is his job. I'm going to promote him. He should get this job. I'm going to let him finish this thing out. Could you imagine if that happens?
Well, I think absolutely. I think that could happen, but I would think it would happen after the Big Ten championship so that he can receive the trophy from the Big Ten commissioner.
Oh, I can't wait to see that.
And then you have that big gap And then I could absolutely see him, winning the Big Ten, coming back. And then it's kind of, does he stick around for the playoffs or not? But yeah, I could absolutely see him doing it after the Big Ten championship because he's got to be the one shaking the hand. He's got to be there for that.
Oh, no doubt. I can't wait to see it next Saturday. All right, guys, let's pick some of these games here. We haven't picked any NFL games in a while here. Let's go with the Steelers at the Bengals. Pittsburgh's been one of those teams. I mean, offensively, they stink. Defensively, they've been in games. They fire Matt Canada. Joe Burrow's out for the year in Cincinnati. Who do you like, Nick?
I got the Steelers. I think they have two good running backs now, and they're going to open up the offense a little bit now that Matt Canada got fired. And Cincinnati, you just don't know what you're going to get. So I got the Steelers winning that one.
Statman, how about you?
Yeah, I'm with Nick on this one. I like the Steelers in this game also.
I think in my pick 'em, I'm in fourth place out of 65 people right now. And I think I picked the Bengals, but now that I really think about this, I think I have to switch my pick because I think I'm with you guys. I think I like Pittsburgh. Is there any coach in the NFL where anybody gets more out of their players than Mike Tomlin?
No.
Not many, that's for sure.
So I'm with you guys. I'm going to go with the Bengals. Two teams I can't figure out. Tampa Bay at the Colts. Tampa's 4-6. The Colts 5-5. Two teams that every week I'm like, they're not going to win this one, and they end up winning. Baker Mayfield, I think, has had a pretty good year in Tampa outside of the 4-6 record. Statman, who do you like in that one?
This is a tough one to pick because they're both really bad, but I'm going to go with Tampa on this one.
Nick, how about you?
This is why you go out and you get a veteran backup quarterback that can win you games if they're put in the situation. I got the Colts winning. I got Gardner Minshew continuing to do the job and, do enough to win games.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's the main reason I'm going with them. I'm going with the Colts. Minshew mania, baby. Normally, I would not put the Giants on there being a Giants fan that I am. The 3-8 Giants at home against the 2-8 Patriots. The Syracuse guy at quarterback today. Could he get it done again? Nick, what do you think?
Franchise quarterback right there, Tommy touchdown. So, again, the most Giants thing to do would be to win this game and get yourself out of those top couple picks and those quarterbacks. So, unfortunately for Giants fans, I think the Giants get it done. I think Saquon's too good, and I think the Giants win the game and slowly move down the draft.
Yeah, I had to look and see who I picked on there, but I'm with you. I like the Giants. Listen, DeVito had the best celebration. He did the Italian like this at the end of when he threw the touchdown pass. How can I go against him?
He wins the game, and then he goes home, and Mom makes him a nice meal.
Statman, who you like?
I like the Giants in this one.
You'll never pick the Patriots. I don't think you've ever picked the Patriots.
I have actually because I knew they would win and I didn't want them to. So that's when I would pick the Patriots. But
how about the Texans at home and CJ Stroud at home against the 7-3 Jaguars who are 4-0 on the road? Statman, I'll start with you first. Does CJ Stroud keep this thing going?
I like the Jags in this one.
Nick, how about you?
Yeah, I'm going to go Jags. I think Stroud's going to be really good, but I think he's starting to hit that rookie point where he's starting to throw interceptions. Defensives have started to get more and more film on him and are throwing some unique looks. And, again, he's going to be really good, but Jacksonville is actually really good right now. I think they're the most underrated team in the NFL. So I got the Jags winning and really taking a big step towards clinching that AFC South.
I love Jacksonville. I love the hard nose that they play on offense. I love Trevor Lawrence. I like Jacksonville. Being a Michigan guy, I hate to say this, but I've seen a lot of the post-game interviews with C.J. Stroud, and I'm really impressed with how he's handled everything. Even when they was talking about the Michigan-Ohio State game, just the class that he's had. And remember, they were kind of making fun of him, right, because he scored so low on that Wonderlic test.
Yeah.
He says, I'm not a good test taker. I'm a football player.
Yep.
So I think he's had a great year. I don't think they get it done today at home, but he's got the Texans 6-4.
Wow.
So hats off to him. The 7-3 Browns at the 5-5 Broncos. Would we ever be thinking that Denver would be back at 500?
No, we were not. And, Denver continues to win games in strange and mysterious ways. And I think they get it done again. Denver, I don't even know. It's not even Russ isn't cooking. Russ is holding on right now. But I got Denver getting a big win.
What's he say? Denver Nation, let's ride, or
let's ride.
Let's ride. Statman, you think Denver continues and they win again?
No, I don't trust them. I like the Browns in this game.
I'm going to ride with Denver at home. I think I originally picked the Browns, but I think I'm going to ride with Denver at home. I mean, listen, at one point, everybody's saying, Sean Payton, this was a mistake. Russ has looked terrible. They've kind of figured this thing out over the last 3 weeks.
Yeah.
They've looked like a whole different team.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to go with the Broncos. I'm looking at these other games. Rams, Cardinals. Cardinals are terrible. I don't want to waste our time on that game.
Yep.
How about the Chiefs at the Raiders? Raiders are 5-6, but they're 4-1 at home. Any chance the Raiders, KC's -9.5?
If there's one game in division that Kansas City struggles with every year, it's normally the Raiders. The Raiders somehow steal one every couple of years against them. I don't see it happening this time. I think Kansas City rolls, but this could be a sneaky close game.
Statman, how about you? Who you like?
Is Taylor Swift going to be in attendance for this game or no?
I don't know. I didn't hear anything.
Well, she's not. I think they lose, but if she is, I think they win. But no, either way, I think the Chiefs are going to win this game.
I can't figure the NFL out. I'll bet some college games. I can't bet an NFL game to save my life because I feel like every week, like this would be a game, Nick, I'd say Kansas City should roll the Raiders.
Yes.
And it doesn't happen. And I don't know why, but I'm going to go with the Raiders. I think they pull an upset off at home. I don't know why. I have no reason why I think the Raiders stink, but they have some life with their new interim head coach.
Yeah.
They're playing hard for him.
Yeah, changed the whole culture.
So I don't know why. I'm just going to pick it. I think the Raiders are good at home, but KC's good on the road. But I'll ride with an upset and go with the Raiders. Bills at the Eagles. The Eagles are 4-0 at home. The Bills have struggled so far, Nick, on the road. They're 1-3. Statman, I'll go to you first. The Eagles at home, or you like the Bills on the road?
I like the Eagles at home in this one. I hate to say it. Sorry, Nick, but I think the Eagles are going to win this game.
Did you guys see I got my I had the jersey. The jersey only comes on once a year. I had the jersey on all day yesterday. My son had his on.
Yep.
But I did wear a
Go
Go
Blue.
Blue Michigan shirt on today. I just wanted to – because I see Nick's got the Bills shirt on. So,
Got my Josh Allen today.
let me go back fast. Then we'll pick these last two games. So, this whole sign stealing thing, I'll say this all the time. When you're a fan, they could get thrown the kitchen sink and forfeit every game. Next year, they could throw Harbaugh out, all the coaches out. They could be a dumpster fire. You still got to support your team no matter what. I'm still going to support Michigan. Nick, you're the same thing with Buffalo.
Yep.
You're going to support Buffalo. But, the college football fans that I can't stand will say, wow, you shouldn't like Michigan. They stink. Or look at all their cheaters or this. You have to support your team through the good and the bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, you look at me and Statman, we're Syracuse fans. We just watched the dumpster fire for the last couple of years, and thankfully they finally made a move.
Hey, wait till we start talking Syracuse basketball here. It's college basketball season too, so pretty soon we'll be talking about that.
Yeah.
Nick, you're gonna pick your Bills, right?
Yeah. No, I think this is a huge week, and I think the Bills get one on the road, and I think this is like the turning point here. The Bills win and got 2 weeks to prepare for Kansas City, and I really like where they're at. So I'm going Buffalo on the road, double digits. They win by 10.
Are they at Kansas City or home?
At Kansas City for like the 7th straight time.
Ooh, because I'm just looking which one would be a better. They got to get one of these two.
I think they get today. Kansas City will be tough, and then they get Dallas, which, again, Dallas is fool's gold. They're undefeated against under 500 teams like the Dolphins. So, I mean, you play who's on your schedule, but I don't know that Dallas is as good as everyone's making them out to be. We'll find out in a couple weeks. But, if the Bills get 2 of 3 and then basically win out until that last game against the Dolphins and see if the Dolphins are resting starters because they've already clinched, I think at this point it's just get into the playoffs as a wild card and, go on the road and hopefully beat some teams. But if you can't win on the road, you play the Eagles and the Chiefs, arguably the Super Bowl favorites right now. You got to win on the road in the NFL if you want to be a good team.
Yeah, I think Philly's too good at home. I like Philly, but going back to your Cowboy thing, of their 8 wins, 5 of the 8 wins are against teams under 500. So they haven't really played anybody yet. But you're right. You got to play the teams on your schedule. The Sunday night game tonight, guys, the last game we'll pick here, the Ravens 8-3. I feel like these Chargers every year are just 500. They're always floating around right there. They should win. Some games they should win, they lose. They got a lot of talent on that team. Baltimore at Chargers. Statman, who you like?
I like Baltimore in this game. Pretty big,
Nicky,
too.
Baltimore?
Yeah, I think at some point Chargers got to stop blaming the coaches and start looking at who's got the ball in their hands the most. I mean, Herbert's got to start winning close games, or else he's going to start getting the mantra that he's not as elite of a quarterback as people think. So I think the Ravens win. I think they cruise.
Well, guys, we're about out of time, but I did want to throw in there because I said we'll be talking some college hoops here very shortly. But my Gonzaga Bulldogs played the Syracuse Orange, and the Zags. Syracuse couldn't handle that motion offense.
Yep. Syracuse couldn't handle the teams that play really big and strong and physical. And, again, that's kind of a holdover from the Boeheim era. So I think slowly he's got to kind of interject his philosophy. I mean, the culture and stuff, a lot of things are going to stay the same. I like the fact that we're playing some man-to-man defense, but, I mean, for Syracuse to win games, they got to get more physical. I mean, you can't win with 6'9" guys at 140 pounds getting pushed around by grown men. So until Syracuse gets physical, teams like Tennessee and Gonzaga, who are both top 10 teams and teams that can make late runs into the tournament, by no means am I throwing in the towel on the season. I still think Syracuse can win 20 games and be a tournament team. But clearly they're not ready for the big stage yet.
No. Yeah, I would agree, Nick. I think Syracuse can win 20 games or better this year. I don't think there's any room to panic. I know Statman would say when I always say this is Mark Few's deepest team or Mark Few's best team. I actually don't think this is one of his better teams. I think this is his deepest team. I think he can play 9 or 10 guys. Steele Venner's the kid, the transfer from Eastern Washington. That's hurt. I think that's a huge blow for them. I don't think the guard plays as deep as he's had in the past, but that style of offense, Nick, is just fun. They're fun to watch.
Yeah.
And Nemhard running the point, I mean, could be the best point guard in the country or one of the top point guards in the country. That Maui was a stacked field.
That was a really good field, and I think every team is better for playing in it because you got a couple of really good games outside of the teams that had to play Chaminade. But, I mean, you go back now and, like, Syracuse comes back and they go right into the, ACC, SEC challenge, and they get a good LSU team. So we'll find out really early on how good this Syracuse team is. But, I really like the way the team is made up. And I think down the road, these 2 losses will really help them in the long run.
Well, I'm excited to talk some college basketball. We'll be talking a lot more of it here on the show. But, guys, it's been fun. I know we miss our guy Pags. Hopefully we'll get Pags on next week. But we got a lot of good feedback on the podcast this way. So I kind of like it. I kind of like just kind of coming in, hanging out. Yeah. I miss seeing you guys in the studio, though. That's the only thing. But it's fun. I like it.
I'll tell you what, it's nice not to have to clean up when you go to the podcast, though, because when we went to the station, we were cleaning up every week.
Yeah, it's nice. It would have been nicer to be able to see you guys, but not to be in that studio though.
Yeah, no, I would agree. So I think we'll try to keep this thing rolling on the podcast. So enjoy the games today, guys. I don't think I'm doing too much. You guys got any plans today?
I'm going to my parents for Thanksgiving, and I'm going to sit back, watch the Bills, hopefully make a step in the right direction.
Statman, what do you got today? You strumming?
Yeah, I actually might be putting in new pickups in my Telecaster. I'm going to give that a try.
I think we're going to go to the casino and see the gingerbread houses today, just to get out of the house. We'll see. But all right, guys, I appreciate it. We'll talk to you again next week.
All right, sounds great.
Thanks, Rob.
All right, guys. Fun show. I want to make sure I thank Scott Pitoniak for coming on this morning, talking about Syracuse and what we think direction-wise they're going to go for the head job. There, all signs pointing to Dan Mullins. We'll see if Syracuse makes that announcement relatively soon. So on behalf of the entire crew here at the Mohawk Valley Sportswatch, Coach Pags, Coach Medicis, a Statman, and myself, enjoy the rest of your weekend, everybody. We're out.